what's going on, all you side hustlers out there? Amir Baluch, your host for Side Hustle MD Virtual Summit. We're here with a very special guest, Dr. Tobin Arthur, who's probably worked with more physician entrepreneurs than probably anybody in the United States. He's the CEO of Angel MD. He's been in this game for 10 years. He's an expert when it comes to startups, especially in the healthcare space. So we're very lucky to have him on here and give some insight as to how physicians can make a startup their side hustle. So Tobin, thanks for coming on board today.
Hey, Dr. Baluch, great to have you, get me on your show, and great to be a part of this program. Really excited about it.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome, man. I talked to so many doctors that have ideas and they have this fear. They don't know how to get started, but you guys have actually done a good job. So what is the story behind Angel MD, and how did this come about? Why did you start it, and what has it become?
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick background. So go back about 12 years. I was working on a startup. I'd been working on startups for the last 20 years and had got increasingly involved in the healthcare space. And we were working on a startup down in San Francisco in Palo Alto area. And it was very clear to me that when physicians were involved with startups, these startups were more successful. And there was a number of reasons for that. Startups need the expertise, they need the influence of doctors. What I learned over the years and began to really appreciate was that physicians are the market makers in healthcare. Very little happens in the space without their advice, without their prescribing something or recommending a product. In other words, it needs their primatur, it needs their acceptance. And so I began to think, how do you get physicians involved in these companies at scale? Because it was very clear that the companies that were successful had more physicians involved. In fact, in the company I was working on at the time, we had a billionaire physician involved as an investor. And I asked him if there were any patterns to things that were successful over the course of his career. It's always good to learn from billionaires. Right. And he said, it's really simple. He said, I don't believe in predicting winners, you build winners. And in the healthcare space, when I get my physician colleagues involved in these companies, we de-risk them. We can make recommendations, we can give product feedback, we can help them raise money, we can do a whole lot of things that de-risk the companies. And so that was really the genesis of Angel MD, was starting to think about, how do we do this at scale? We can't continue to do this one-off. The market, everything around us is becoming digital. And so how do you help physicians who have always had a lot of influence in the industry? But you would appreciate this. Over the last decade or so, physicians have been losing that influence. They've been losing their voice. And that's for a lot of reasons. Administrators and kind of the suits, if you will, have been pushing physicians out of the process. And there's really no efficient way for them to get involved in these startups. And so that was really the genesis of Angel MD. How do we create a software platform that connects doctors and dentists with startups, thirdly with investors, and then finally with industry with a big I. So the big pharmaceutical companies, the big medical device companies, even hospital systems and payers, because these companies will ultimately be the clients, the customers of these startups, or the eventual buyers of these startups. Most of them are not going to go public if they're successful. Most of them are going to get bought. So we wanted to figure out, how do you connect all these stakeholders? And that was the genesis of Angel MD. We've had some fortune and had some success. It's become the largest network of medical startups in the world. And there's thousands and thousands of physicians by different specialty. And I'll say too, you might, separate folks into two different buckets. And so if you're watching this and you're curious about startups and how to maybe become an advisor or work with startups, we have opportunities for you. You may be thinking, I've got ideas, or I'm working on something in the garage, and you want to become the entrepreneur. We've got pathways for you. And one can lead to the other. A lot of folks might start off advising startups and getting involved and learning about this whole process. And then at some point into it, think, I'm ready to jump into this and do it on my own. So that was the genesis of this.
Very cool. So a couple of different ways to get into startups. Guys, you don't have to create a product yourself. You could be part of a team that's already rocking and rolling and get your cut of the action. And then when you're ready to spread your wings on your own, you could jump out there too. And Angel MD has all the resources to help you there. So now, what do you think is the upside for doctors that get involved in startups, either starting their own or jumping on as an advisor?
Yeah, there's a learning curve. And what we've kind of figured out, first of all, we start with the fact that physicians are extremely busy, right? No physicians are sitting on their hands and wondering, what to do with all their excess time. So they're very time constrained. In fact, probably more time constrained than any professional in the market. So a lot of them might think to themselves, how would I possibly make time to do this entrepreneurial stuff? And so we make that very efficient. Like I said, you can dip your toe in the water and just start to learn. The first thing we say is to come join Angel MD. We run events constantly. Every couple of weeks, we have an event called Pitch Club. We have bigger events called Impact Summits that happen on a quarterly basis. We put out a daily news briefing. We put out newsletters every 2 weeks. We have educational webinars and a program called Angel MD Academy, which we'll be announcing here in the coming weeks. The bottom line is there's a ton of resources just to learn. If you've ever watched Shark Tank and you thought this is pretty cool, I'd like to play Mark Cuban, or I'd like to be pitching Mark Cuban, then we've got the way to jump into that. But we do it in a way that respects the time constraints of a physician, and also the fact that a lot of physicians have not had a lot of business training. You went to medical school, did residency, in some cases fellowships. You've been extremely busy practicing in your career. You've never really had time to study some of the things that people that came up the business route did. And so we don't take that for granted. We want to give people some of the fundamentals. So the first thing we say is just step in and learn, just observe and kind of see what's interesting to you. And then from there, if folks have an interest to become an advisor, in today's analog world, and I say analog because the way this has happened traditionally has been very analog, where a physician might become an advisor to a company that's across the street or in the same city, simply because they're in their own vicinity. That's not the best way to get connected to a startup. You might be very well equipped to, be advising a company in Boston and you're based in San Diego. Well, you wouldn't know that company in today's world because it's so inefficient. Angel MD, we help try to make those matches, find the right companies for you to advise. Second from that, we have opportunities for people to evaluate these companies. And so that's something that physicians in our network really enjoy. They help to evaluate and determine, all startups are not going to be the next, Facebook, so to speak. And so we want to try to weed out which ones have the most promise, because that's where you want to invest your time. And so we do that through an evaluation process where physicians can participate. Now, in participation in doing these evaluations, they're able to receive equity in a pool of startup capital, startup equity, if you will. And so that's a great opportunity just to start building some equity in this process in exchange for your time. And then for those who say, no, I'm ready to jump in, I've got this idea. In fact, we had a conference a couple of years ago, and a famous cardiovascular surgeon who's an inventor and now does work for Johnson & Johnson. He gave a talk and he says, the greatest laboratory for physicians is Home Depot. And he says, I go walk the hallways of Home Depot on Sunday evenings when no one's around, and I just start playing with stuff. I start putting pieces of pipe together and this, and I'm just thinking through all these things that can be better. And he's got over 100 patents to his name. So he said, the greatest laboratory is Home Depot. We should have turned around and had Home Depot become a sponsor. But the whole point of that is that we will help guide those that want to jump into that journey and kind of walk them through, how do you do things from building a team, raising capital, getting your business plan. There's a whole series of things, almost like a mini MBA. And all of that material, all those resources are available on Angel MD and through our network.
Yeah, a lot of important points there. Like the tagline basically for our summit is mindset, mentors, and master plans. So, and there's been a recurring theme with other people I've interviewed, like if you want to get from point A to point B, you kind of need a roadmap and somebody to show you the way if you've never done it yourself. And so, I've seen a lot of doctors just fail trying to do everything themselves. They could just, reach out to people that have a network of people that can help, or, talk to somebody that's been there, done that. And, on your platform, that's definitely all there in one shot. And guys, if you ever jump into Angel MD, I mean, you guys have the medical knowledge. Don't think you don't have value outside of your clinic or your practice, but there are tons of companies that could use it. Like, for example, one company that stood out to me, I was like doing the Shark Tank thing on the Pitch Fest thing a few Tuesdays ago, and a group of doctors had IV Toradol, I mean, already all the statistics of opiate use and stuff like that in hospitals after surgery, like all comes to my mind. Like, I could use that to help them. We've got resources at hospitals. So really, you guys have resources and connections and the knowledge to help these companies get in. You don't always have to have your own company. And then you mentioned also like the mistakes that some people make, and you guys have the mentors there and can help people out. I know there's a lot of mistakes to be made, and that's like the biggest risk of startups. What are like a handful of these mistakes that you've seen? So I'm kind of curious to see what you've seen on your side.
Yeah, I love what you just said. And by the way, we have a tagline internally where we say innovation is social. And what we mean by that is this whole thing is a team sport. Like nobody's going to build these things on their own. So you need to surround yourself with people that are going to help. And, invariably you're going to make mistakes. That's part of the entrepreneurial journey is you want to make, run a lot of experiments, make mistakes, and then iterate. But if you can surround yourself with people who've been through the journey and can help you, you can make a few less mistakes and move a little bit quicker. But in terms of some of the mistakes that we see people make that are fairly common, physicians, you're all in the position, you're extremely smart, extremely well educated. And in the environment that you're in, you're the leader, you're the respected person everybody looks to. And the entrepreneurial pathway requires a lot of humility and requires the fact that you're not always going to be the smartest person in the room. And I don't mean that in an IQ sense. I just mean that in terms of what you're building, and having that humility to say, I'm going to surround myself with people that are better than me in these various areas. And then ultimately listening to them is important. And so that's a big piece, is just checking egos at the door and saying, this is an experiment. Every startup is an experiment. You're running hundreds and hundreds of experiments, and you're going to be wrong more often than you're right. But the faster you figure that out and you pivot and iterate and shift, the faster you're going to get to success. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, again, to have the humility to say, I don't know everything. And this is a constant learning process. Now, the great thing about physicians is physicians are lifelong learners, right? It's part of the industry. You have to go to years of training, and then you've got continuing medical education. That doesn't change here in the entrepreneurial world. So it's constant learning. That's why we put out all the materials we do. We encourage people to read the bulletins that come out every morning. They're going to tell them a little bit who's raising money and how are those companies raising money? Where are those companies based? What sectors is the money flowing to? Listen to our podcast, Innovation for Alpha. We have great interviews with physician entrepreneurs and physician advisors, and they give lots of insights into what they've learned over time. And so learning from these other people's experiences. So those would be a couple of things, is to, be open-minded and constantly learning. Number two is to not always have to be the smartest person in the room. Third thing I would say is, and we see companies that are coming out of the NIH are particularly good at this. They use a methodology that was adapted by a guy named Steve Blank, the lean startup methodology. And partly what that means, or partly what he adopted, was this idea that you go out and you do customer interviews and you figure out, is there a market for this thing that I want to build? We see lots of examples of physicians who see a problem during the course of the day and they think they've got a solution, and we've had cases where physicians have spent literally millions of their own dollars building some new device and prototyping and spending tons of time patenting. And they never really address the question of, is there a market for this? Is somebody willing to pay me $2 for this thing that's going to cost me $1 to produce? And those are very sad situations, because not only are they spending a lot of their own money, they're also spending a lot of their time. So we really encourage physicians to do the research to figure out, is there a customer for this product or this idea?
Yeah, yeah. And that last part is the most important. Like, a lot of people ask me, before they invest in my biotech fund, like, how are you doing due diligence on these companies? I just work backwards. Like, I think, why do companies fail? And let's knock that out. And the number one reason, 42% of the companies that fail will fail because they have lack of product market fit. I mean, you got to make sure you got product market fit. By the way, number two is cash flow, that's 30%. They just run out of cash, so they can't get to the next milestone. Number three is management. They can't overcome struggles. And then whatever else is left, I forgot. But, that's like 85, 90% of the reason for
Yeah, with those three, you've knocked out all the ones that really matter.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was just talking to somebody the other day about this. People use this term grit. They'll say, well, our startup has this characteristic. And one of the hot ones these days is to say we have grit. It's one thing to say that, is another thing to actually really mean that. Like, what does that mean? Because you're going to go through some valleys. Building these companies and being an entrepreneur, it's a lonely sport. And so true grit will really show. And it's not something you can just throw up on the wall and say, we have grit, until you've actually shown. You've been through the valley and you've sucked it up and you've continued on.
Yeah. Now, speaking of, physicians with their own entrepreneurial ideas, what if there's probably a handful of doctors listening right now? They have their own idea, like they're going to create the next innovative needle for nerve blocks or a new ultrasound thing. They got it in their mind. They're going to do it. What would you say to that person watching right now? What would be their next step?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I wouldn't say there's one singular answer. If I was in their shoes, and the way I would answer is to say, if I was them, what I would do next is, first of all, create a little bit of a mastermind group. Create a group of people that I can trust, that will give me guidance, give me feedback, and objective feedback. You don't want people that are just going to continually tell you your baby's cute, right? I want people to tell me my baby's ugly, because I'm spending my money and I'm spending my time on this thing. I don't need to be told I'm smart and that I'm right. I need to be told that we need to course correct if needed. So I think for creating that little closed mastermind group is a good first step. Second step is to plug into a community. Angel MD is designed for this. It's a community of entrepreneurs, of advisors, and fellow clinicians who will help guide you down the path. You've got questions. We spend time constantly advising. Physicians will call us up and say, I'm looking for an IP attorney, or I'm struggling with this. What do you recommend? And even though it's not something that we charge for, it's not, quote, a service, we're happy to do it. It's a byproduct of our network. Is just, we want people to be successful. And so I would say jump into this community, and then you'll figure it out from there, right? Everybody's journey is going to be a little bit different. Now I can tell you the flip side of what not to do, which is a lot of times what physicians think is, I got to go get an MBA. And there's nothing wrong with an MBA. If you want to become a hospital administrator or some kind of administrator, great. You probably need the title and it will help. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, it's a complete waste of time and money. You just shouldn't spend any time there. No business school is going to teach you how to be an entrepreneur and build a business. If they knew how to do that, they'd be out building businesses, not teaching at some school. So I don't want to disparage them. I'm just saying there's a right tool for the job, and that's not the tool for this job.
Got it. And guys, this is a continuing theme in this summit. You have medical knowledge, and that's an asset. And a lot of you guys are thinking, because med school basically had trained you like this, and residency, the only way to monetize that asset, that knowledge, is to see a patient with what you were trained to do. There's so many other ways to monetize it. And this is a really awesome way if you want to put your big toe into the big leagues with companies that may or may not get acquired for tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. They actually need you more than you think. So it's definitely cool to go on to Angel MD, check it out, put your big toe in, get involved with the community. It's just really awesome way to monetize the value that you've already spent like 12 years building up, or however much education. Some people have done more than that. So those are all.
That's well put. I would just add to that. I mean, that's really well said. But, and I reinforce this with physicians I talk to all the time. They think their primary asset is their practice. Or, so if I say, no, it's not your practice. I mean, you're trading dollars for hours, and you've got a great living, right? It's one of the best professions on the planet in terms of the salaries and the incomes that you can drive. Nothing wrong with that. But if you want to build assets, you've got to do that after hours. And you've got to do that through, either investing or advising or building. It's kind of the three options if you're going to build assets. And you're absolutely right. That expertise, that experience, and your network of colleagues that you've built, those are extremely valuable. And if you plug it into this direction, you're going to build assets over time. Now, I will say, most every physician that gets involved in this kind of activity, working with startups, tells us, yeah, if I make money on this, that's fantastic. And, if you do it right, you're going to make money in the long term. It's like investing. You got to, diversify what you're doing, et cetera. But all of them tell them I'm having a great time. This gives me a way to exercise what I learned and what I'm doing that maybe has become a little rote and a little routine in my day job. This is actually fun. I look forward to doing this stuff nights and weekends. And it makes my job actually even more interesting because it gives me a reason to keep plugging away. So it's got benefits even beyond the monetary benefits.
Awesome. So I always like to end with a few steps on how people can get started with, the next part of their journey in entrepreneurship, in this case, startups. So how can they get involved with Angel MD? And also, I think you have a little checklist to help out those guys that want to get involved with startups.
Yeah, absolutely. If we'll provide a link if you want to sign up, we're going to do a special briefing for the SideHustle MD community and this event. And so that's going to be the first Thursday, I believe, in February. So if you sign up for the link, we'll send you an invite to that briefing. We'll tell you a little bit more about how to get involved as an entrepreneur and advisor. We'll answer questions one-on-one. I don't expect it to be a real large group. In addition, we'll send out top 10 mistakes that physicians make getting into this space. And so we're happy to provide that list for you. And then the very simple thing is just go register an Angel MD if you're not already a member. It takes 20 seconds. There's no cost. And then you start receiving the newsletters, you get the daily briefings. And I would just say lean in, come to Pitch Club once in a while. They're fun, they're interesting, they're only an hour. It's like watching Shark Tank, but specifically designed for your industry. And so have some fun with that. And, the last thing I would say, it's like any community. You get out of it what you put in. And so the more people want to get out of it, the more they should lean in and look for ways to contribute and be involved. And there'll be plenty of ways for them to, not just make deposits, but ultimately be able to take withdrawals.
Awesome. There you guys have it. You got all the steps right there, 20 seconds, and you're good to go. And if you got any questions, just reach out to either one of us. There's some links below the video, and you're also going to get some in your email as well. So Tobin, thanks for jumping on board today with us and dropping some knowledge.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks, Dr. Belush.